The transport ship left Daniel Crawford on the frozen surface of Kelvera without ceremony. The Thraxian guards pushed him out of the cargo bay and tossed a small container of supplies after him. They did not speak to him or look back within minutes. The ship rose into the gray sky and vanished beyond the clouds. Daniel stood alone on a world of ice and stone. The wind cut through his jacket like knives. His breath froze in the air before him. He picked up the supply container and felt how light it was. They had given him enough food for maybe 2 weeks. There was a thermal blanket, a water recycler that looked broken, and a small energy torch. The shelter they had left him was barely more than a cave carved into a hillside. Daniel had been an engineer for 15 years before the Thraxians conquered his colony. They wanted him to modify his terraforming equipment into weapons. They said his technology could turn planets into wastelands and destroy enemy fleets. Daniel had refused. The Thraxian commander told him that weakness had consequence. Gulliver was their answer to people who valued principles over survival. The moon had a winter cycle that lasted 8 standard months. No prisoner had ever survived a full cycle. The cold was not the only challenge. The atmosphere was thin and toxic in places. The native life was sparse, and mostly inedible water existed only as ice that needed to be melted carefully. Daniel had asked how long the other prisoners lasted. The guard said most died within 3 weeks. The strongest made it to 2 months. Then the deep winter came and finished everyone. Daniel looked around his new home with careful attention. He had grown up in Alaska, where his grandfather taught him old skills. His grandfather had been a stubborn man who believed modern technology made people soft. Every summer, they would go into the wilderness with minimal gear. His grandfather showed him how to build shelters, find food, and make fire from nothing. Daniel thought those skills were outdated until now. The hillside shelter faced south, which was good. Rock around it was clay-rich stone. There were scattered boulders that had broken off from ancient geological activity. Patches of gray-green lichen grew in protected spaces. The lichen was the only visible life. Daniel spent his first 3 days exploring in careful circles around the shelter. He marked his paths with small stone cairns. He found a depression that collected ice, which meant a water source. He discovered that some lichen varieties burned slowly when dried. He also found clay deposits exposed by erosion. On the 4th day, Daniel began to build. He used his engineering training and his grandfather's lessons. He needed a heat source that would last months with minimal fuel. A simple fire would consume his supplies too quickly. A stone oven was the answer. He had built one with his grandfather when he was 12 years old. The design was ancient, but effective. Daniel started by digging into the clay layer. His hands went numb quickly in the cold. He worked in short bursts, warming himself in the shelter between efforts. He shaped bricks from the clay and let them freeze solid. The cold actually helped cure them faster than normal drying. Each brick took careful work. He carved them to fit together tightly. He built the oven against the shelter's back wall, where it could radiate heat inward. The design included a chamber for slow-burning fuel and channels for heat distribution. It took him 2 weeks of constant work. His supplies ran low, but he pushed forward. The oven needed to be finished before the deep cold arrived. When he finally completed it and lit the first fire, heat spread through the small space. The stone absorbed warmth during the day and released it slowly at night. It was not comfortable, but it was survivable. The first Thraxian inspection came after 1 month. 2 guards arrived, expecting to find a frozen corpse. Instead, they found Daniel alive and working on improvements to his shelter. They looked at the stone oven with confusion. One guard asked what it was. Daniel explained the basic design. The guard seemed disturbed by this. He said Daniel should not still be alive. Daniel said nothing in response after the guards left. Daniel continued his routine. He gathered lichen daily and dried it near the oven. He melted ice for water and rationed it carefully. He insulated the shelter walls with layers of dried lichen and clay. His body adapted slowly to the thin atmosphere. He learned which areas to avoid where toxic gases pooled. He found ice formations that trapped pockets of breathable air. The work kept him focused. Every task had a purpose. His grandfather had always said that survival was about routine and disciplined. People died in the wilderness because they panicked or gave up. The ones who lived were those who worked steadily and stayed rational. Cold deepened as weeks passed. The wind grew stronger. Snow began to fall in sheets that lasted for days. Daniel's oven kept the shelter warm enough to prevent freezing. He burned small amounts of lichen constantly. The heat was never quite enough, but it was sufficient. He marked the days by scratching lines into the stone wall. 60 days passed, then 70. The second inspection came, and the guards seemed angry. They reported his condition to their superiors. Daniel overheard them arguing about whether this was shameful. One guard said a human surviving where Thoraxians failed made them look weak. The other said it proved humans were more dangerous than they thought. Neither option pleased them. Daniel went back to his work after they left. Had no illusions about his situation. The Thoraxians wanted him to die. They needed to prove that defying them had fatal consequences, but Daniel's grandfather had taught him something important. Spite was a powerful motivator for survival. If they wanted him dead, he would live. If they wanted him broken, he would build. The stone oven became more than just a tool. It represented his refusal to accept their judgment. Every brick he had placed was an act of defiance. Every day he survived was proof that strength came in many forms. The Thoraxians valued combat power and physical dominance. They built an empire on conquest and force. But Daniel knew that real strength was the ability to endure. His people had survived ice ages and plagues and wars. They had crossed oceans in wooden boats and built cities in deserts. Humanity's greatest talent was refusing to quit as the 100th day approached. Daniel looked at his stone oven and smiled. The fire inside burned steadily. The heat spread through the shelter outside. The wind howled and the temperature dropped far below freezing. But Daniel Crawford was warm. He was alive, and he had no intention of giving his captors the satisfaction of watching him fail. The winter was meant to break him. Instead, it was teaching him just how stubborn a human could be. His grandfather had been proud. Daniel noticed the tracks on the 120th day. Small prints appeared in the snow near his shelter entrance. They were definitely not his own. The pattern suggested something walking on 4 legs, but with unusual spacing. He examined them carefully. During his morning supply check, whatever made them was light and moved in an irregular pattern. The tracks appeared and disappeared over the next several days. Daniel also noticed his supply of dried lichen was decreasing faster than it should. He had been careful about rationing. The amounts did not match his usage. Something was taking his supplies at first. Daniel assumed it was a native creature. A Calver seemed lifeless, but perhaps something survived in the deep cold. He set up simple markers to track any disturbances. He placed small stones in specific patterns that would shift if touched. Over 3 days. The markers moved repeatedly. Whatever was visiting him was persistent. Daniel considered setting a trap, but decided against it. Any creature desperate enough to risk approaching him was probably starving. He could not blame it for trying to survive. On the 8th night after finding the tracks, a massive storm rolled across the region. The wind reached speeds that threatened to tear the shelter door loose. Snow fell so thick that Daniel could not see beyond arm's reach. He fed extra lichen into his stone oven. The heat barely pushed back the deadly cold. Around midnight, he heard something over the wind. It sounded like scratching at the door. Daniel grabbed his energy torch and moved carefully toward the entrance. The scratching came again, weaker this time. He opened the door slowly and raised the torch. A small figure lay collapsed in the snow just outside. Daniel pulled the creature inside quickly and sealed the door. He placed his torch in a holder and looked at what he had found. It was a Thoraxian child. The young one was barely larger than a human toddler. Her scales were dull gray instead of the vibrant colors adult. Thoraxians displayed she was painfully thin frost covered her body, and her breathing was shallow. Daniel's first thought with suspicion this could be a test or a trap set by his captors. But the child's condition was too severe to fake. No species would risk killing their young just to test a prisoner. He wrapped the small Thoraxian in his thermal blanket he placed near the stone oven where the heat was strongest. He melted snow for water and tried to get her to drink. The child was barely conscious. Her eyes opened briefly and showed pure fear. She tried to pull away from him, but was too weak. Daniel spoke softly and kept his movements gentle. He had no medical supplies for a Thoraxian. He could only offer warmth and water and hope it was enough. Through the night he tended to the young one. He adjusted her position near the oven to prevent burns. He offered tiny sips of water every few minutes. He kept the fire burning steadily. The child shivered constantly, even with the heat. Daniel recognized hypothermia when he saw the core temperature had dropped dangerously low. He added layers of dried lichen around her like insulation. By dawn, the shivering had decreased. The child's breathing became more regular. Eyes opened and focused on him with more awareness. Daniel offered water again, and this time she drank. He heated a small portion of his remaining food rations. The paste was designed for humans, but it was nutrition. The child ate slowly, watching him with suspicion. After eating, she spoke in a weak voice. The words were in universal trade language that most species learned. She said her name was Kira. Daniel introduced himself. Kira asked why he had not killed her. The question startled him. He asked why he would do such a thing. Kira explained that she had been left on Kelvera to die. Her scales grew unevenly, which marked her as flawed Thoraxian. Society did not accept imperfection. Her parent had tried to hide her condition, but eventually the authorities discovered it. They exiled both of them to this frozen moon. Her parent died within the first month. Kira had survived by hiding and stealing small amounts from the supply drops. She thought Daniel would hurt her because humans and Thoraxians were enemies. Daniel listened to her story with growing anger. The Thoraxians had exiled him for refusing to make weapons. Now he learned they also abandoned children for being different. He told Kira that she was safe with him. He explained that humans did not punish children for the actions of adults. Kira seemed confused by this concept. She had been taught that weakness deserved elimination. Daniel said that throwing away children was not strength. It was waste and cruelty. Real strength was protecting those who needed help. Over the following days, Kira slowly recovered. Daniel shared his limited food with her. He showed her how the stone oven worked. He taught her which lichen burned best and how to identify. Sci-Fi's Kira was young but intelligent. She learned quickly and asked many questions. She wanted to know why Daniel helped her. He explained that on Earth, humans believed communities grew strong by supporting all members. Leaving people to die because they were different made everyone weaker. Kira said this was opposite to everything her people taught. Daniel agreed it was. He said that was probably why humans were hard to defeat. A species that protected its weak had more members to contribute more. Perspectives led to better solutions. Diversity was a strength, not a weakness. Kira thought about this carefully. She asked if that was why Daniel survived when others died. Daniel smiled and said partly yes. His survival skills came from his grandfather. Those skills were preserved because humans valued old knowledge. They did not throw away wisdom just because it seemed outdated. The Thoraxians probably had similar knowledge once, but their focus on combat strength made them forget other types of power. 3 weeks after finding Kira, the monthly inspection arrived. 2 guards entered the shelter and stopped immediately. They recognized Kira despite her poor condition. One guard asked how she was alive. Daniel said he found her during the storm. The guard said she should have died months ago. She was marked as weak and unsuitable. Daniel said she seemed perfectly suitable to him. She was smart and helpful and learning quickly. Guards looked disturbed by this. They spoke in their own language, which Daniel did not understand. Before leaving, one guard warned Daniel that saving her would not earn him mercy. The Empire did not reward sentiment. Daniel replied that he was not looking for mercy. He was simply living according to his principles. After the guards left, Kira asked if Daniel would be punished for helping her. Daniel admitted he might be, but he said some things were worth the risk. Kira's safety was one of them. That night they sat near the stone oven. Kira watched the fire and spoke quietly. She said her parent told her that strength came in many forms. Her parent died protecting that belief. Now Daniel was showing her it was true. She asked what happened next. Daniel said they would survive the winter together. They would prove that cooperation was stronger than cruelty, and maybe, just maybe, they would show the Thraxians that their way was not the only way. Kira looked at the stone oven that kept them both alive. She said it was strange that a pile of rocks and clay could change everything. Daniel agreed, but he explained that humans had been building fires and gathering around them for thousands of years. Fire brought people together. It created community. The stone oven was more than just heat. It represented the choice to build instead of destroy, to nurture instead of abandon. Kira curled up in her blankets near the warmth. For the first time since her parent died, she felt something like hope. The partnership between Daniel and Kira developed quickly over the following weeks. Kira's health improved dramatically with regular food and warmth. Her scales began showing hints of color, though they remained uneven in pattern. Daniel found her pattern interesting rather than flawed. He told her it made her unique. Kira was not used to uniqueness being valued. Daniel taught her his daily routines. Each morning, they checked the oven and added fuel. They melted ice for water and prepared food. They inspected the shelter for damage from the night's wind. Kira learned to recognize weather patterns by watching the ice formations. She could predict storms hours before they arrived. Daniel was impressed by her natural observation skills. He explained that many human scientists started by simply watching nature carefully. Kira asked about Earth and what human communities were like. Daniel described cities where millions lived together. He talked about families that included adopted children and people from different backgrounds. He explained how humans had councils where many voices contributed to decisions. Kira found this fascinating and strange. Thraxian society was organized by strength rankings. The powerful decided everything. The weak followed or were removed. She asked how humans prevented chaos without strict hierarchy. Daniel said it was not always perfect. Humans argued and disagreed constantly, but discussion was better than domination when everyone could contribute. Better ideas emerged. Kira helped improve their shelter in ways Daniel had not considered. She knew which local plants had roots that could be dried and burned. She showed him how to layer ice blocks as windbreaks. Her smaller size allowed her to access crevices where useful materials collected together. They made the shelter more efficient. Daniel expanded the stone oven design. He added chambers that captured heat and distributed it better. The modifications meant they used less fuel for the same warmth. Kira suggested using reflective ice to direct light into darker corners. It worked surprisingly well. During their 4th week together, Daniel asked about Kira's parents. She spoke slowly about a Thraxian named Voss who chose love over status. Voss was a respected warrior until Kira was born. When the authorities demanded Kira's abandonment, Voss refused. They were both exiled as punishment. Voss taught Kira everything possible in their short time together: how to hide, how to find food, how to survive cold. Voss's last words were about being strong in ways the Empire did not recognize. Daniel listened and understood. He told Kira that Voss was braver than any soldier, choosing to protect a child against overwhelming pressure took real courage. Kira's eyes brightened with tears. She said Daniel reminded her of Voss. Both believed strength meant protecting others. Daniel said he was honored by the comparison. Monthly inspection came again. This time 3 guards arrived, including their leader. A scarred warrior named Vex. Vex examined the improved shelter with obvious displeasure. He questioned Daniel about his activities. Daniel explained the modifications truthfully. Vex asked why he wasted effort on the abandoned child. Daniel said Kira was not abandoned anymore. She was his companion and helper. Vex turned to Kira and spoke in the Thoraxian language. Kira responded firmly, though her voice shook after a tense exchange. Vex turned back to Daniel. He said his commanders were watching this situation closely. Some viewed Daniel's survival as humiliating to the Empire. Others saw it as proof humans were more dangerous than previously thought. Either way, Daniel's fate would be decided soon. Vex warned that helping Kira would not save him. The Empire did not reward mercy. Daniel replied that he was not seeking reward. He was simply living according to his values. Vex stared at him for a long moment. Then he said something unexpected. Told Daniel that his own sibling was abandoned years ago for showing fear in battle. Vex still wondered if that decision was right before leaving. Vex looked at Kira. He told her in universal language that she had grown stronger then. The guards departed. Kira asked Daniel what Vex had said to her in Thoraxian. Daniel had not understood those words. Kira explained that Vex had questioned her loyalty, asked if she would betray Daniel to regain status in the Empire. Kira had told him no. She said Daniel showed her what real strength looked like. It was not about dominating others. It was about building something that helped everyone. Daniel felt proud of her answer. He told her she was wiser than many adults he knew. As winter deepened, their routine became comfortable. They worked together efficiently. Kira learned basic engineering concepts from Daniel. He learned Thoraxian history from her. She described an empire built on conquest, but slowly weakening. Constant warfare drained resources, removing anyone deemed imperfect, reduced their population. Other species were learning to resist Thoraxian tactics. The empire was strong, but brutal. Daniel said that matched his observations. The Thoraxians excelled at direct combat, but they struggled with adaptation and long-term planning. They rejected anything that did not fit their narrow definition of strength, that made them predictable and vulnerable. Kira asked if humans had always been different. Daniel laughed and said no, human history was full of societies that made similar mistakes. They conquered and dominated and eventually collapsed, but humans learned from those failures. They realized that diversity and cooperation were survival advantages. It took thousands of years, but the lesson stuck. One evening, Kira asked Daniel about the stone oven. She wanted to know why it mattered so much to him. Daniel explained his grandfather's philosophy. The oven represented self-reliance and preparation. It showed that simple tools used skillfully could overcome complex problems. Building it required patience and planning. Maintaining it required discipline. The oven kept them alive. But it also reminded Daniel of who he was. He was someone who built rather than destroyed. Someone who prepared rather than panicked. Someone who valued old wisdom even when newer technology existed. Kira said the oven represented something to her. To it was proof that rejected things could still have value. She was marked as flawed and left to die. But Daniel showed her she could contribute and grow. The oven was built from ordinary clay and stones, yet it was stronger than advanced Thoraxian technology. Maybe imperfect things could still be valuable. Maybe being different was not the same as being weak. Daniel agreed completely. He told her the Thoraxians were wrong about many things. They were wrong about her. They were wrong about strength. They were wrong about what made a society successful. Kira smiled and asked what happened when the winter ended. Daniel admitted he did not know. The Thoraxians might execute him. They might leave him here permanently, or something unexpected might happen, but whatever came next, he would face it knowing he made the right choices. Kira said she would face it with him. They had become family, not through blood or biology, but through shared struggle. That night, they maintained the stone oven together. The fire burned steadily outside. The temperature dropped to lethal levels. but inside the shelter built by human stubbornness and Thoraxian cleverness, warmth prevailed. Two different species, both rejected by the Thoraxian Empire, both surviving against expectations, both proving that strength came in forms the powerful failed to recognize. The winter was meant to break Daniel. Instead, it gave him purpose. A simple stone oven and a hungry cub had shifted everything now. They just had to survive long enough to see what their survival meant. The change in the Thoraxian Empire began with stories. Word spread about the human who survived winter on Kelvar Amor. Surprising was the news about the abandoned cub who thrived under his care. Some Thoraxians viewed this as shameful proof of weakness. Others quietly wondered about their own lost family members. Vex reported his observations to his superiors with unusual detail. He described the stone oven and explained its function. He noted how the human and child worked together efficiently. He mentioned that both seemed healthier than expected. The report traveled up the command chain quickly. It reached Commander Zara within days. Zara was a high-ranking military official known for harsh discipline. She had risen through the ranks by proving her strength. Repeatedly, her own parentage had been questioned due to her unusual scale coloring. She survived challenges that would have killed others. Now, she read about a human who used different methods to survive. Zara decided this situation required personal investigation. She assembled a delegation, including medical specialists and cultural observers. They would travel to Calvara and evaluate the human prisoner, depending on what they found. Daniel Crawford would be freed or executed. There would be no middle ground. The delegation arrived on day 180 of Winter 6. Thoraxians in full environmental suits approached Daniel's shelter. Kira saw them coming and moved closer to Daniel. Nervously, Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. He had known this moment would come eventually. Zara entered the shelter first. She was larger than the other Thoraxians with scales that shifted between bronze and deep green. Her eyes were sharp and missed nothing. She examined the stone oven immediately. Her specialists began taking measurements and recordings. Zara spoke in perfect universal language. She asked Daniel to explain his survival methods. Daniel walked her through everything, showed how the oven distributed heat efficiently, explained his routine for gathering and processing fuel. He demonstrated the water collection system. He discussed the shelter improvements he and Kira developed together. Zara listened without interrupting her. Specialists whispered among themselves and took notes. One medical officer examined Kira with obvious surprise. The cub was healthy and active, showing none of the weakness expected from her genetic markers. After an hour of inspection, Zara turned to Daniel with a direct question. She asked why he helped Kira when the Thoraxians were his enemies. Daniel considered his answer carefully. He explained that children were not responsible for political conflicts. Punishing Kira for the Empire's actions against him would be wrong. Besides, survival was easier with cooperation. Kira's knowledge of local conditions helped him. His technical skills helped her together. They were stronger than apart. Zara asked if this was a common human philosophy. Daniel said yes, and no humans understood cooperation intellectually, but applying it consistently was difficult. Fear and prejudice often won over logic. However, human societies that embraced diversity tended to succeed. Those that rejected differences usually failed eventually. History proved this pattern repeatedly. Zara walked around the shelter slowly. She touched the stone walls and examined the oven construction. She asked who taught Daniel these techniques. Daniel explained about his grandfather. He described learning traditional skills alongside modern engineering. His grandfather believed technology was useful, but should not replace fundamental knowledge. Zara said this was interesting. The Thoraxians had abandoned many old practices in favor of military efficiency. They focused entirely on combat strength. Perhaps they had lost valuable knowledge in the process. One of Zara's specialists approached with data. The specialist reported that the shelter's heat efficiency exceeded their environmental suits. The stone oven design was crude, but remarkably effective. With proper materials, it could be scaled up significantly. The specialist suggested this technology might have applications for Thraxian colonies. Zara's expression remained neutral, but Daniel sensed surprise in other. Specialist finished examining Kira. The medical officer reported that Kira showed excellent health despite her genetic markers. Her uneven scale growth caused no functional problems. Her cognitive development was above average. There was no medical reason for her to have been abandoned. Zara turned to Kira and spoke in Thraxiankara, responded clearly and firmly. The exchange lasted several minutes. Daniel wished he understood the language. Finally, Zara switched back to universal language. She addressed both Daniel and Kira. She said their situation presented a problem for the Empire. Daniel's survival made the punishment look ineffective. Kira's health contradicted the assumptions about genetic flaws together. They represented an uncomfortable challenge to Thraxian philosophy. The Empire could execute Daniel and re-abandon Kira. This would eliminate the immediate problem. However, the story had already spread too widely. Many Thraxians were questioning the old practices. Families who lost children to abandonment were speaking up. Soldiers like Vex, who lost siblings, were asking difficult questions. The Empire needed a different response. Ara presented Daniel with three options. First, he could return to human space with his freedom restored. The Empire would acknowledge his sentence was completed. Kira would remain on Calvara or be transferred to another location. Second, Daniel could choose execution. His death would serve as a statement that defiance had consequences. Kira's fate would be decided separately. Third, he could accept a new proposal. Daniel asked about the third option cautiously. Zara explained that the Empire was changing slowly. Traditional commanders still held power, but others recognized that their methods were failing. The constant rejection of imperfect individuals weakened their population. Meanwhile, species like humans grew stronger through inclusion. Some leaders believed the Thraxians needed to adapt. Daniel could serve as an advisor. He would teach survival techniques and cultural practices to young Thraxians, would work with specialists to improve their colonial infrastructure. In exchange, Kira would be returned to Thraxian society with full status. Her genetic markers would be re-evaluated. Their abandoned cubs might also be reconsidered. Daniel would not be free, but he would have purpose and protection. Daniel asked what happened if he refused. Zara said honestly that she would recommend his execution. The Empire could not allow successful defiance without consequences. However, she personally believed the third option served everyone better. The Empire gained useful knowledge. Daniel gained meaningful work instead of imprisonment. Kira gained a future. Before answering, Daniel looked at Kira. She watched him with worried eyes. He knew what his choice meant for her. If he refused and was executed, she would likely be abandoned again. If he accepted freedom and left, she would face an uncertain fate. But if he stayed and worked with them, she had a real chance. Daniel told Zara he had a counterproposal, would accept the advisory position with conditions. First, Kira must be allowed to stay with him and assist in his work. Second, any cubs whose genetic markers were similar to Kira's must be re-evaluated. Third, he wanted access to communication with human space to inform them of his status. Fourth, his work would focus on building and survival, never on weapons. Zora considered these terms. She conferred with her specialist briefly, then she agreed to the first three conditions. The fourth was already assumed since that was why Daniel was exiled originally. She warned him that many Thraxians would resist these changes. Traditional commanders would view him with hostility. His work would be watched constantly. Any failure would be used as evidence that the old ways were correct. Daniel said he understood. He had not expected this situation when he built his stone oven, but he recognized an opportunity when he saw one. If his survival could help change harmful practices, the risk was worthwhile. Ara extended her hand in the human gesture of agreement. Daniel shook it firmly. Kira made a sound of relief and happiness. 1. of the specialists asked Daniel about the stone oven design. He wanted to understand the engineering principles. Daniel smiled and began explaining. He talked about heat retention and fuel efficiency. He discussed the importance of material selection. He showed them how simple adjustments improve performance dramatically. The specialists listened with genuine interest. Zara watched this exchange thoughtfully. She realized that Daniel's real strength was not physical power. It was the ability to solve problems creatively. It was patience and planning. It was the willingness to teach rather than dominate. These were qualities the Thraxian Empire had dismissed as weakness. Perhaps they were wrong, as the delegation prepared to leave. Zara spoke to Daniel privately. She admitted that her own survival was due to similar principles. She succeeded not just through combat, but through strategy and adaptation. She recognized something of herself in his approach. She could not promise the transition would be easy, but she would support his work because she believed it was necessary. Daniel thanked her. He said he hoped this was the beginning of something better. Zara replied that hope was another thing Thraxians had forgotten to value. Maybe it was time to remember. The journey to the Thraxian homeworld took 3 weeks. Daniel and Kira traveled aboard Zara's command ship with full diplomatic protection. The crew watched them with mixture of curiosity and suspicions. Some whispered that bringing a human to the homeworld was dangerous. Others argued that new ideas were necessary for survival. Daniel spent the journey preparing lessons and demonstrations. Kira helped him organize information into formats Thraxians would understand. She explained cultural nuances. He needed to navigate carefully. The Thraxian homeworld was called Thraxis Prime. It was a hot, arid planet with vast deserts and rocky mountain ranges. Cities rose from the landscape like fortresses. Everything was built for defense and displays of strength. When they landed, protests were already organized. Traditional commanders gathered supporters to oppose the new initiative. Signs declared that weakness should not be rewarded. Crowds shouted that human influence would corrupt their society. Zara's security team escorted Daniel and Kira through hostile territories. Some Thraxians threw objects and insults. Others watched silently with uncertain expressions. Daniel noticed that not all faces showed anger. Some showed curiosities, some showed hope. The training facility was located outside the main city. It had been a military base, but was converted. For Daniel's program, the first class would be small 20 young Thraxians, all marked as imperfect in some ways. Some had unusual scale patterns like Kira. Others were smaller than average or showed physical differences. All had been scheduled for abandonment before the policy review. Daniel stood before them in the converted training hall. The young Thraxians watched him with fear and confusion. They did not understand why they were here. Instead of exiled, Kira stood beside Daniel as his assistant and translator. She addressed the class in their native language first. She told them her story. She described being abandoned on Kelvara and expecting to die. She explained how Daniel saved her, not because he was weak, but because he was strong. She said they were about to learn a different kind of strength. Daniel began his first lesson simply. He asked them to help him build a stone oven. The class looked confused. They asked why this was important. Daniel explained that survival was about more than combat. It was about preparation, cooperation, and using available resources. The oven would teach them all three. Over the next several hours they worked together. Daniel showed them how to identify good clay. He demonstrated proper brick formation. He explained the physics of heat retention and distribution. The young Thraxians struggled at first. They were trained to compete, not cooperate. But slowly they began working as a team. Stronger students helped weaker ones carry materials. Quick learners taught slower ones the techniques. By evening they had completed a functional stone oven. Daniel lit the first fire and they watched heat spread through the structure. He explained that this simple device could keep them alive in harsh environments. One student asked why the Empire never taught them this. Daniel said carefully that sometimes organizations forgot useful knowledge. The Thoraxians were not wrong about everything, but they had focused so exclusively on combat that other skills were lost. Another student asked if Daniel thought they were weak. Daniel responded firmly that weakness was not what brought them here. Being different did not mean being weak. In fact, diversity made groups stronger. He pointed out that each student contributed something unique to building the oven. Some had better spatial reasoning, some had steadier hands, some understood the instructions faster and helped others. Together they accomplished more than any individual could. Over the following weeks, the program expanded. Word spread about the unusual training. More young Thoraxians asked to join. Some were marked for abandonment. Others were simply curious about alternative approaches. Daniel taught them practical skills. He showed them shelter construction, water purification, and resource management. He introduced concepts of teamwork and shared problem-solving, emphasized that intelligence and creativity were as valuable as physical strength. Kira became an essential part of the teaching. She translated not just words, but cultural concepts. She showed the students that someone marked as flawed could thrive and contribute. Her confidence inspired others who had been labeled as defective. Resistance from traditional commanders intensified. They organized campaigns against the program. They argued that Daniel was weakening Thoraxian youth. They demanded the initiative be shut down. But something unexpected happened. Families who had lost children to abandonment began speaking publicly. They shared stories of talented young people who were exiled for minor differences. They questioned whether the Empire's strength was worth the cost. Soldiers like Vex added their voices. They talked about siblings and friends lost to harsh traditions. They asked whether removing so many citizens actually helped the Empire. The debate divided Thoraxian society deeply. Zara navigated the political conflict carefully. She presented data showing that Daniel's students performed well in assessments. They demonstrated problem-solving abilities that traditional training did not develop. They showed loyalty to the Empire because they were finally given a place in it. She argued that the Empire could maintain its strength while becoming more inclusive. 6 months after Daniel's arrival, a critical test occurred. A Thoraxian colony on a harsh ice world experienced catastrophic equipment failure. Traditional rescue would take weeks and many would die from cold. Zara proposed sending Daniel and his trained students. The traditional commanders objected violently. Sending the flawed ones would guarantee failure and prove their point. Zara insisted. She said if Daniel's methods worked, lives would be saved. If they failed, the traditionalists would be vindicated. The vote was close, but Zara won approval. Daniel led a team of 15 students, including Kira, to the ice colony. They arrived to find thousands of Thoraxians struggling in lethal cold. Their advanced technology had failed, and they had no backup systems. Daniel immediately organized the students into teams. They taught colonists how to build emergency stone ovens. They showed them insulation techniques using local materials. They established supply chains for fuel gathering. Within 48 hours, the death rate dropped dramatically. Within a week, the colony was stable. The colonists were amazed that simple techniques solved problems their technology could not. Many admitted they had never learned such basic survival skills. News of the rescue spread throughout the Empire. Traditional commanders could not deny the success. Families celebrated that their exiled children had saved lives. Public opinion shifted noticeably towards supporting Daniel's program. Zara used this momentum to push for permanent policy changes. The practice of abandoning imperfect children was officially ended. Genetic markers would be re-evaluated with input from medical and cultural experts. Young Thoraxians would receive both combat training and practical survival education. The changes were not complete or universally accepted. Many traditionalists still resisted, but the direction was set 9 months after arriving on Thoraxis Prime. Daniel stood with Kira watching a new class, 50 students this time. With more requesting admission, the training facility was being expanded. Other instructors were learning Daniel's methods to teach additional classes. Kira had become a full instructor. Her zephyr uneven scales were now worn as a symbol of the new approach. Daniel thought about the journey that brought him here. He had been exiled to die on a frozen moon. The Thraxians wanted to break him as punishment for his principles. Instead, built a stone oven. He survived through old knowledge and stubborn determination. Then, a hungry cub appeared, and everything changed. Saving Kira gave him purpose beyond personal survival teaching. Others gave his experience meaning. Now he was helping reshape an empire's understanding of strength. It was not the outcome anyone predicted. Daniel sent a message to Earth that evening. He reported his status and explained the situation. He asked that someone tell his sister that Grandpa's lessons about the stone oven saved his life. He also mentioned that those lessons might be changing an entire civilization. The message would take weeks to reach human space. Daniel wondered what they would think. A human engineer, exiled by enemies, became their teacher. A discarded child became a symbol of change. A simple stone oven, built from clay and rocks, became the tool that shifted an empire. Kira approached with a report on the next day's lessons. Daniel reviewed it and approved her plan. She had grown so much since that night in the storm. She was confident and capable. She belonged here not as someone tolerated, but as someone valued. That night, they maintained the original stone oven together. It stood in the center of the training facility as a reminder. A plaque beside it read in both human and Thraxian languages, "Survival is not victory. Living together is." Daniel looked at the words and smiled. The winter was meant to break him. Instead, it taught him that strength came in unexpected forms. A stone oven and a hungry cub had shifted fate for both of them. Now they were sharing that shift with others. The work was far from finished. Resistance remained strong in many quarters. Change happened slowly, even when necessary. But Daniel had learned patience. During his winter on Kelvere, he knew that foundations built carefully lasted longest. Stone oven proved that everyday simple materials combined with knowledge and effort created something enduring. He hoped the same would be true for the changes they were building. Kira touched his arm gently. She said the fire needed more fuel. Daniel smiled and added lichen to the flames. Warmth spread outward as it always did, steady,